Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri Love. I'm your host. Thank you very much for tuning in. I have very exciting guest today, and I'm very grateful. Before I introduce my guest, I want to introduce my book, which is A Gift from Adversity. The same title as my podcast, A Gift from Adversity. This is available on Amazon, and the subtitle is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. And I experienced all of this trauma and adversity, and I started to do a lot of motivational speech and a guest speaker gigs, and a lot of people before I published my book asked if I had a book, and I didn't. So I published it, and I'm very grateful for all the help I got, my publisher, BookLogix, and all the friends who have been supporting me to publish my book. But now this year, I decided to do a podcast because I felt very compelled to share not only my story, but other people's story who had been to some trauma or adversity. And it's been a wonderful journey, not only learning about the adversity, but the tools that people use to overcome and a gift that came from it. So let's introduce our guest today. Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for coming in to A Gift from Adversity today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Nicole, can you please tell our audience your name, where you're from, and then what you do for work, and if you have a website or social media handle that you want to share with our audience?
Sure. So I'm Nichole Howson. I'm from Essex, Ontario, in Canada. I do social media marketing, and you can find me honestly anywhere. My handle is just my name. So just make sure you don't miss the H in Nichole, and you're good to go.
Great. Thank you so much. And then what do you do for social media? I know you have some explanation on the Facebook. So what exactly you do?
Yeah, so I work with businesses to help them market their business and their clients' businesses using social media, email marketing, copywriting, graphic design, kind of all the things that you would need to do for online marketing. So we do that. I have an agency with currently 11 people on our team. So lots of fun, lots of different clients. We work with people in Canada, US, and the UK. So we have a wide range of people.
Hold on one second.
Sure.
Sorry about that. So we are on live interview. Um, so before we start our topic at Gift from University, so you're from Canada. I just want to mention I've had several guests from Canada, and I'm very grateful. And then so far, I've had very much of different countries guests. I just had guests from Thailand, New Zealand, Australia, and it's very exciting to have guests from all over the world who are sharing the story, and I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
Great. So let's dive into our first question, which is the adversity. So can you please tell our audience what was your adversity?
Sure. So I struggled with depression and anxiety as a teenager. And when I turned 19, I had what we now know to be a manic episode from bipolar disorder. But at that point, I was undiagnosed. We didn't know. So I packed up my whole life, moved to the other side of the province with a guy, and watched my life fall apart over the course of a year. And at the end of that year, I had hit such a low point in my life that I didn't think there was any out for me. So I ended up attempting suicide not once, but twice in the course of 48 hours. So I struggled quite a bit with that at that point in my time.
Yes, I am so sorry to hear that. Um, so let's go back a little bit, and then how did you realize that you were having a depression?
I had a hard time functioning. I was very active in the church, in the community, at school, and I lost all motivation. I struggled a lot. I was crying consistently, and was struggling with self harm. So there was some warning signs and that sort of thing, that I was really struggling. And after going to the doctor, I was able to tell that I had depression and anxiety.
So, at some point, like when you're growing up, did you have any trauma?
Um, a little bit here and there. I had some deaths in the family and that sort of thing, and that kind of triggered a little bit of the depression.
And how old were you when you had this attempt?
When I attempted, I was 20 years old.
20 years old then. Do you mind if I ask how old you are now?
I am 28.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And anxiety and depression has so many variety of symptoms, and then identifying what it is. And sometimes people don't know. Myself, I didn't even know what PTSD was until I was 22,
Hmm.
because there was no education, there was no talked about, and especially coming from this abuse and domestic violence or these situations, um, it's been very difficult to even acknowledge that you do have these conditions. So when you found out, how did you feel?
When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder after my attempts, it was like the answer to all of my confusion. It suddenly made sense. Everything I had done, my whole life, every little piece of like what is going on, suddenly was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Of course, that's why I reacted that way, or I was acting that way. I was having a manic episode, or I was in a depressive state, and being able to see that really helped me understand what was going on in my life. I had a moment where the psychiatrist heard my whole story. We talked to her about everything, and she got down right in front of me. She looked me in the eye, and she said, "Nichole, this is not your fault." And it was like a wave of relief flushed over me, because I was just so ashamed of everything that I had done and how I had acted, and knowing that it wasn't my fault. Obviously, I still have to own up to my own mistakes. Those don't just get washed away, but understanding that it was because I have bipolar disorder and not because I wanted to act that way, was a huge. It was it was eye opening and totally made me feel better.
Can you please explain our audience what exactly bipolar disorder is?
Yeah, so bipolar disorder is a mood disorder, and it can cause manic episodes, which is when you are acting uncharacteristically and usually a little bit um, irrational, or like doing things that are abnormal to your personality and potentially dangerous. And so for me, it looked like I spent a lot of money. I did some sleeping around and started drinking, all things that I wouldn't have done before. It was just out of my personality, but that's what I was doing at the time. I was on multiple different medications and not taking any of them correctly, and just not understanding how to take care of myself at that time.
Well, thank you so much for explaining, because sometimes I don't understand multiple personal disorder or bipolar disorder and the difference and then the fact. And then so what age were you diagnosed? So 20 years old were you diagnosed after the attempts, and then but until then you didn't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So um how do you think it affected you not knowing what you had for the first 20 years of your life?
Um, there is clear moments where you could tell I was having a manic episode, and nobody understood. My parents just thought I was a difficult teenager. And understanding now I was having a manic episode, my parents were like, oh my gosh, I wish we had understood that. But we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't understand what bipolar disorder was until I was diagnosed and we did some research. And we didn't see that at the time. I remember there was this one moment, and I was probably in grade 6, and my friend was having a birthday party and I was super excited to go. And my mom wanted some help around the house. And I remember just completely losing it and not wanting to help and crying and screaming and throwing a fit. And my mom was like, listen, if you don't stop, you're not going to this birthday party. And I remember going to the bathroom and I was crying and I looked in the mirror and I was like, okay, enough. Like, you have to stop. We want to go to this birthday party. And I walked out of the bathroom and completely lost it. And I didn't go to that birthday party because obviously my parents followed through on consequences. But I remember thinking to myself, it's not my fault. Like, I didn't mean to do it. I had no control over it. And now understanding, I was having a manic episode. Of course, I had no control over it. But at that time, it just looked like I was being a difficult teenager.
So similar thing happened to me because I was never diagnosed with PTSD due to my sexual abuse and domestic violence and all that stuff that my mom thought I was crazy, and I had a suicidal attempt when I was 15 as well. And then she thought I was just crazy teenager, and then she kicked me out when I was 18. She thought I was just ungrateful. And I think it would be definitely different, like, if there was a mental health talk. And so Canada, how is the situation in terms of understanding the mental health, especially younger generation now, um, with either depression, anxiety, bipolar? How is the situation now in Canada?
We talk about it a lot more now than we did before. As a teenager, there was no talk about mental health. There was no Bell Let's Talk, which is a campaign to get you to understand more about mental health and how we can support people. It raises money for people who are struggling. There was none of that. There was no understanding of what depression, anxiety was. So the doctor offered me medication, and my parents were like, "No, we're gonna pray for you, and it's gonna be okay." Understanding now that yes, prayer can work, and I'm 100% a Christian, and I totally agree with that. But also, medication is allowed, and can definitely help when you are having a chemical imbalance in your body. So understanding now that it's not just a personal choice to be depressed, but it can genuinely be a chemical imbalance, is really helpful to understand, because now we know how to treat it. But there was no talk of that as a teenager, and as a young adult, we didn't understand any of that.
So I'm 46 years old, and then in Japan, when this extreme adversity was happening, it was in the 80s, and then nobody talked about incest, no, like, no Me Too movement whatsoever, and women's rights being very, very minimized. The country itself, it was just hell because I had no idea. Then even later on, I would say, like, I had panic attacks and I don't know what it was and I don't know what's it called. I was just I was crying, like you said, in the bathroom, like, crying, losing it. And then I, like, sometimes hide. I was hiding and locking myself in the bathroom, or so sometimes I have to pull over, when I was driving. And it's just like really, when you are like said, oh, you had a bipolar or you had this condition, then it's almost like, oh, you have fever, take Tylenol or ibuprofen, but you don't really get the temperature inside of your brain.
Hmm.
So you can't diagnose it. And then not so many people know how to cope it. Like you said, it's getting out there, the mental health talk. Uh,
Hmm.
but back then in Japan, especially, there was like absolutely no help, no understanding, and then even professional level, I don't think anyone would have ever understood. Now, for a bipolar diagnosis, how important was it for you?
It changed everything for me. It helped me understand what was going on in my body. It helped me learn. It taught me that I have to be very in tune with my body. I'm very conscious of when I'm having a bad day. Is it a bad day because things happened, or is it a bad day because my anxiety, depression, PTSD, everything is out of whack? Do I need to call my doctor, or do I just need to take a day to relax and sleep and take a nap and reset? And so I have to be very aware of those things to be able to get the support that I need and to support myself. But before knowing that, I didn't I didn't know how to take care of myself. It's taken 8 years to get to the point where I am now, where I can successfully handle having a panic attack and then being like, okay, you know what? I am okay. And being able to pull myself back up after that. Before it was just I didn't understand what was going on.
So you said you had a death in your family that might have caused the anxiety or depression. Do you
Mhm.
mind to share a little bit about it?
My my cousins, were twins, and one of them passed away, within a day of being born. So that was really hard to understand, and make sense of. They were born prematurely, and were the size of my dad's hand, when they were born. So it was really hard to understand that. They have an older sister, and she was living with us at the time, so there wasn't really time to grieve because you didn't want to be upset around her. So it was a struggle. So the only time I could grieve was at school, which you have to be in school and pretend everything's okay because you can't burst into tears in the middle of class. And so it was a struggle for me, and it took me a long time to be able to grieve through that.
Was there any other elements that you can think of that caused the depression, anxiety, or bipolar? Other than that,
Not that it caused it, but it triggered it. I was heavily bullied my whole life, so that didn't help at all. And knowing that was it was a struggle to kind of feel safe wherever I was.
what age were you when you were getting bullied? When did it start?
Um, SK. From the time I was in school, I can remember being in like grade one and somebody calling me fat and me feeling miserable about myself. They called me Santa Claus actually, and I was so upset. And I to this day still remember that feeling. I remember being called Santa Claus, and it's such a random thing now. But that was, I think that's the earliest thing that I can remember outside of like, no, you can't play with us, and being singled out and that sort of thing. But
And how long did it continue?
right up until grade 12 when I graduated, and then I kind of just hit a point where I didn't care. And honestly, if I'm being honest, cyberbullying is the thing. And I'm an adult and I have a tough skin now, but I still get negative comments on stuff. Um, uh, I get comments on YouTube all the time of people being rude and disrespectful and calling me names, and it's still hard and it hurts. I purposely don't look at my comments anymore until I'm in a place where I can handle it because I don't know what's going to get thrown at me. But if you go viral, don't look at the comments. That's my that's my advice.
So when you are getting bullied at school, bullying is such a thing. The people don't understand the depth of the trauma that creates it. Um, I recently interviewed a father who lost his son to a bully at age 13.
Hmm.
He committed suicide
Hmm.
due to a bullying. And people just don't understand how bad it is. And I was bullied when I was also getting sexually, physically abused by my dad. So I was really numb the whole situation, I would say, playing dead was my coping mechanism.
Mhm.
So I lost word. I was mute. I couldn't speak at all. And I think that happened to Maya Angelou as well. After
Mhm.
she was raped and spoke out who it was, and he got arrested and he got killed. And then she thought it was her fault, and then she lost her voice for several years. And
Mhm.
then when she obviously, got her voice back, she became the best author and poet. But when you were getting bullied, like, how was your feeling when people are listening to this podcast and have never been bullied in their lives? Like, how do you describe the feeling of isolation and singling out and people saying these mean things as teenager or as young as in elementary school? It's awful. What do you remember? What kind of feelings do you remember?
I just feel being singled out, feeling gross and bad about myself. I was so concerned about my weight as a teenager that I ended up with an eating disorder, and um, I, I was in really good shape, and I was still like, oh my gosh, I'm fat, and please don't look at me, and really concerned about myself. It made me so insecure that it took me years to get past that. And there's still times where I'm super insecure, and it's feeded back because I was bullied so much as a kid.
Did school do something about it?
Not really. You can talk about it. Kids get smart, honestly. They don't do it in front of a teacher and then it's he said, she said. We talked about bullying in school. I found every time I spoke out, it got worse. So I stopped.
That is just so awful. It's the second and third shock waves that we experience as a victim of bullying, domestic violence, sexual abuse. The people don't believe you.
Hmm.
And that is sometimes worse than getting bullied
Hmm.
because you're already bullied or you're already abused and you want some help. You want somebody to rescue you and then understand you and then bystander.
Hmm.
But, oh no, not bystander, but upstander. Sorry, upstander. Be on your side. But then I've experienced that many times too, Nichole, that even my mom or even some people just, don't believe it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
like teachers, like you said, kids can get smart out and like what you said, she said, he said, and just get hash hash. And that happens in adult world too.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would say adult world bullying is worse than kids because we get smarter, strategic, and you know, intentionally like hurting people in
Hmm.
many ways, like smartly. It's really, really bad.
Hmm.
So I am so sorry, first of all, that you went through that and that you had no aid and you had no ally. And then shame on the school
Hmm.
and system that did not help a child to be safe and then to be okay to be educated because that's your human rights to be educated. And what happened with the relationship that you mentioned, the boyfriend, and you had meltdown stuff? Can you tell a little bit more details what happened?
Um, yeah, I was dating him down here. I moved up there. Honestly, I don't talk about it much because I don't want to make him look bad. Honestly, we're mature adults now, and um, things happen. So it I wasn't the best person I could have been in that relationship. I was manic. I have to own up on a lot of stuff that I did that I'm genuinely ashamed of. So um, it was a bad situation. It wasn't the right time. And we both learned a lot.
It's very sad that, especially when you were not diagnosed, and then when you didn't understand why. But then when you love somebody, it affects somebody, and then it's really stemming from, I would say, bullying too. That you are the victim now. Later on in your life, these relationships that you form, they can be also the victim of the stem from the abuse or bullying in earlier. So all these people who bully people, they don't understand the lifetime effect in how it can screw somebody's life, of they're making fun of, just they thought it was a joke, and they just don't understand the weight of it.
Hmm.
And I've had that with my first husband, that I was so depressed and I was having a lot of panic attack, and then we ended up getting divorced, and that was like what you just told me, like I blame myself, and then but at the same time, like I really didn't know what it was, and then how to cope, and then how to understand how brain works,
Hmm.
like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Not at all. So I really appreciate you being honest with me and then sharing your experience, and I'm very sorry again that happened to you.
Hmm. Thank
And
you.
how are you feeling now? Are you doing okay?
I am, yeah. I was diagnosed with PTSD a few years ago, and knowing that and understanding that, I have medication now and lots of therapy that I'm doing to kind of support myself and help myself through that. So it's a learning experience, and I'm not 100%, but I am so much better now than I was before, and that's saying a lot. So.
Good, good to hear. Before I move on to our next question, which is a tool, I want to mention something to you and also to our audience. New York Mayor Eric Adams, he was misdiagnosed with dyslexia for the longest time, and he is this African American, very powerful um, former commissioner of police department, and became a mayor 2022. He was arrested when he was teenager due to police brutality, and then he was raised by a single mom called Garbage Boy because she was always afraid of eviction. So they were carrying the new clothes in case he'd get evicted. And the whole time he was bullied and not knowing what it was, and then he didn't know that he had dyslexia.
Mhm.
So when he became a mayor of New York City, he implemented dyslexia screening even from the preschool and also in prison system, so that people can understand and tackle these, disorders that people suffer, that there are tools available, right?
Mhm.
So it's just significant story, historical change, systematic change that may save a lot of people of getting bullied and learning, right? And I think goes same to your story as well. Had you known that and had people known that, it would be different for
Mhm.
sure.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move on to the tools. So what are the tools that you use to overcome this? And before you answer it for me and to our audience, I just want to let you know that it has been such an empowering part of the podcast. I wanted to do this podcast not only to share the adversity, like I said earlier, but the tools are very unique. And these are the survival skills that we all didn't know how
Mhm.
and wish we knew how sooner. And it's very important to me to interview this because this is a real life story
Yeah.
and this is a real struggle and trial and error. And I would say this could be saving somebody's life. So, can you please share what are the tools that you use to overcome?
Yeah, so one of the struggles that I found was when I was having a panic attack or when I was super depressed, I didn't know how to help myself. And the worst part is when I'm healthy, I of course I know all the steps, but when I'm struggling, I can't even begin to start to think about those steps. So one of the things I did was I sat down and I created a map, and it was literally built out on this big Bristol board of when you are depressed, these are the things you're going to do. So it started off with things like self care. And then it was stuff like make sure that you're drinking enough water, eating a healthy meal, going for a walk, taking in, like getting a solid night's sleep. And then if that doesn't work, we're going to call the doctor and we're going to talk to them about potentially changing medications or getting some extra support. I'm going to make an appointment with my therapist to talk about it and see if there's something we can do there. And then right down to the very end where it was like, okay, if I am suicidal, I'm going to go to the hospital. And breaking that all down so I could follow that step instead of going from, oh my gosh, I'm depressed to I think I'm dying. And there was no middle ground because I just didn't know the steps to get there. And so knowing how to take care of myself was really, really helpful. So I had that Bristol board for a very long time. And my mom actually helped me draw it out. And she was like, okay, here's how I can support you and help you because she didn't know either. And we were just learning this together. It wasn't until a few years ago that I really started to understand self-care and what that means. And I kept saying to people, oh my gosh, I don't want to take a bubble bath and do a face mask. That doesn't sound fun to me. Um, when I'm struggling, that is not what I want to be doing. And so knowing that, it was like, okay, well, what is self-care for me? And so um, a lot of times when I'm struggling, it's because my world around me is a little bit chaotic. So one of the things I do, and it seems so silly, but self-care for me can be, okay, I'm gonna unstack and stack the dishwasher. I'm gonna put in a load of laundry. I'm gonna wipe off my counters. And it seems so silly because it's like, how is that self-care? But really it's just something to reset me and make me feel better. Self-care can be literally anything as long as it's building you back up and not tearing you down. And so understanding that now, I my coach used to laugh at me because I like reading books about crime and that sort of thing. And there's a whole series on serial killers. And it's all about them finding them and stopping them and everything. And she'd be like, how is that even self-care? Like, that sounds awful. I'm like, I don't know. I find it okay. Mind you, my self-care, that's not self-care for me right now. But for a while, that was my self-care is I would sit there and I would read a book. And it, it looks different in every season. It looks different for every person, even every day. But knowing what that can be and pulling just random things from that can be really helpful.
I think the coping skill, whatever it works, writing it out and then putting on the wall and have it accessible and like do it like daily, not just only the time that you are having a panic attack,
Hmm.
to build up the muscle and the resilience to a day that you may get triggered. And
Hmm.
then practicing these tools that you just said that works for you or for anyone that is unique to them and writing it out, putting the chart, like those are really important because we work with subconscious as a human being. And
Hmm.
sometimes the consciousness, especially when you have the PTSD panic attack, the limbic part of the brain fires up and the cognitive part of the brain blackout, just can't comprehend anything. Especially those are the times your instinct or even some of these practices of self-care that kicks in and that makes a huge difference, especially when you try to kill yourself or have these suicidal thoughts, um, really dark place that you go. And how can you snap out of it? It's so important. And I was talking to emergency clinician, and a lot of police respond and they have a code for a suicidal attempt. um, calls where police procedure is lock them up, put in ambulance, and then go to the ER. But then emergency clinician's procedure is to talk to them,
Hmm.
and that is different. And the police are understanding because of the pandemic. There were a lot of those calls. This
Hmm.
is what I heard, that nowadays, when you have those calls, the emergency clinician comes with the police instead of just the police coming in with the EMT and locking you. So not just what we talked about earlier, the mental health talk is getting more out there, but then the system itself is changing a little bit, especially after the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, that so many people were so depressed and isolated. And then, the whole world basically. And how do we cope that as a collaborative effort? So I think that is making a change, and that's a game changer for pre-existing condition as well as, whether pandemic or not.
Hmm.
So, how would you say in Canada, now you kind of mentioned earlier the mental health talk is a little bit maybe better, but how about the police response to these suicidal calls, or maybe clinicians, like, emergency services or hotlines? How is it working in Canada?
That's a really good question and not one that I can answer. I'm not really sure at this point.
That is okay. But when people have access, in America, they have like a suicidal like a hotline. And I've
Mhm.
had several friends who volunteered as a receiving callers too. So, I think more resources we have, like you have the tools, you have the, therapists or coaches that un- understanding you in your struggle, and then being on your side instead of bullying you and blaming you. I
Mhm.
think that's such a game changer in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, any other tools that you want to share with our audience besides what you just shared with us?
Breathing exercises are really great. I in therapy we explored many different ones, and different coping and grounding techniques as well. I honestly have one saved in the tab is always open in my browser on my phone, so I can click on that video and it helps you breathe. So whenever I'm having a panic attack, I can click on it and be like, okay, and it takes several times of watching the video to get my breathing down to the way that I'm breathing the way that they want me to. But it immediately starts calming me down because I'm not hyperventilating and I'm able to focus on my breathing and help ground myself. So breathing techniques, if you can learn, there's one that if you draw like a infinity symbol on your hand or on your arm and breathe with it as you're going through. I found that one really helpful because you're feeling it on your skin. So it's helping you focus on that, but also it's building your breathing, and helping you calm down as well. That can be a really great one as well. But there's so many different ones. You can Google them, and look for grounding techniques or breathing exercises.
How do you do the figure eight on your palm? So you breathe in when you are drawing, or breathe out? What do
Yeah.
you do?
So you breathe in and then breathe out. And so you draw it slowly. I was doing a little fast, but you do it slowly and just continue to breathe in and breathe out. And you're thinking about your breathing while you're doing it. So it's helping you focus on that.
So like or something.
Yes. Yeah.
So you go infinity mark, one circle, half is breathing in or half is breathing out.
Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard of that. And I like that when you do it on your palm.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter showed me to trace your fingers, each fingers, and breathe in and out for 5 times.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah.
She's like 6 years old, but she sees a guidance counselor twice a week. And then I think the guidance counselor told her, and she's like, Mom, if you're frustrated or upset, do this or something. And she showed me.
Yeah.
Very cute, but it works very well because especially when you are in the stage of hyperventilation and panic attack, you are breathing so shallow, and it's such a bad cycle. And I've done it a couple of times. It's like, and you can't breathe. And then what's the app? What's the phone? Do you use like an app breathing something? You said you.
I have a video on YouTube. If you just Google breathing exercises on YouTube, there's different ones on there.
Oh, okay. So you just YouTube the breathing exercise.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the best part of the podcast, to be honest with you. I have a guest from Thailand. It's a trauma release exercise. He mentioned that, and I watched the YouTube. It looks really intense. Um, and also, one of my guests told me rage room, which you pay and break everything. And I found it similar here, half an hour away from where I live. It's called Just Smash It,
Mhm.
and I paid $55 with me and my son, and they gave two milk crates full of beans and glasses and wine bottles and stuff, and they give you weapons, and then you just smash everything. So that was very empowering too. So whatever works, but traditionally people say go get a therapist, but I like that, when you are reading the serial killer book, and then reading about it, I like watching these very intense documentaries as well, and it kind of um give me a perspective of how crazy human being can get, and then how to compare my situation and that, and how people survive through it too. So you're not the only one. I like these. Like, it's almost like a learning the crazy psychology, and then how did it get to where they are, and then how, you know I think, compared to what happened to me, I think that it's kind of helping.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. So my last question is a gift that came from it. So what would you say a gift that came from your adversity?
Absolutely. So when I was diagnosed, I needed a job I could do from home for a little bit. I just needed to recover, but I still wanted to do something to make myself feel worth it. I read a lot about people who kind of gave up after they got their diagnosis, and well, this is me and this is how it is. And I was like, that's not going to be me. I need to do something. And so I started a business doing social media marketing, which I now, 8 years later, run a whole agency with team members and everything. And so I would not have started that if I had not had that diagnosis and that time where I had to recover. And so it's definitely a gift, and it's something that came out of it that's really great.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that you found some happiness and niche and ways to help yourself and not helping other people. And I'm very proud that you came out on the other end of it. However, it was a hell of a school year and some trauma that you had to endure. And I'm very sorry again.
Mm.
And I'm very grateful that you came and shared your conversation on this podcast, because sometimes sharing a story can really help people feel they're not alone.
Absolutely.
So before you go, what would be your advice for somebody who is going through the similar adversity that you went through?
Mm. I would say talk about it. Continue to talk about it. Continue to ask for help. Worst case scenario, talk to people online about it. There's so many different groups of people that can give you resources and help. There's a website called The Mighty, and they talk about mental health. I'm an author for them, but there's all sorts of different um, articles on there that explain what you're going through and how to recover from that, and just keep searching and fighting for yourself, because there is answers to that. When I went through my attempts, I didn't think there was any other option for me. I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what to do, which is part of the reason now why I talk about it so much, is because I want other people to know that it is possible to move past that.
Thank you so, so much. I really love that advice. And then I hope that even one person who will be listening to this podcast can get something out of our conversation, I'll be very happy and mission accomplished. So thank you very much, Nichole, for having to come to A Gift from Adversity today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And thank you to our audience for your support. I have more guests coming up in the month of September and October, and then we will see you next time.